The gallows creaked in the silence. Out in the square, the noon sun baked the dirt hard as stone, and the crowd was finally gone. Their boots had shuffled off, their jeers and their righteous laughter fading into the shimmering heat. All that was left was the rope, swaying from the beam like a dead snake. Its end was frayed, blackened by the weight it had held just an hour ago. I leaned against a hitching post, dust thick on my hat, the scars on my jaw tight. This town's brand of justice wasn't my business. I was just passing through, a drifter with no name they needed to know. But then, as the last echo of their satisfaction died, a sound cut through the stillness. It froze the breath in my chest. Not the groan of wood, not the sigh of the wind. It was a whimper so small and raw, you'd think the ghost of what they'd done had stayed behind to weep. I straightened up, slow. My boots dragged in the dust as I stepped into the long, dark shadow of the gallows. My eyes narrowed, fighting the glare, searching the darkness beneath the platform where death had just been served. And that's when I saw it. Tucked away, half hidden by discarded rope and splintered wood, sat a wicker basket. It was old and frayed, the lid knocked crooked. Something was moving inside. I dropped to a crouch, the silence pressing down on me, heavy and thick. My hand, rough and calloused, reached out and lifted the cover. Inside, wrapped in a bundle of ragged, sweat-stained cloth, was the source of the sound. It came again, a tiny gasp, a shallow, rasping breath that sounded like life clinging on by a single frayed thread. A knot tightened in my gut. Before I could even think, a voice whispered from right behind me. "Pa, is that baby breathing?" I turned my head slow. A boy, no older than 10, stood there wide-eyed. A town kid, one who hadn't followed the others back to the saloon. His lips trembled, his eyes fixed on the basket like he was staring at something that couldn't possibly be real. I looked back down. I saw the tiny chest rise, faint, fall, faint. And in that one terrible second, I knew. I knew what that whole cheering crowd had walked right past without a single glance. Up above, the rope swayed. The air was thick with the smell of death. But here, underneath the very platform of judgment, was a life that refused to be put out. My arm slid under the bundle. I lifted it from the basket with a gentleness that felt foreign in my own hands. The weight was nothing, barely enough to fill my palms. The child inside stirred with a weak, rattling cough. The boy beside me whispered again, his voice choked with a mix of fear and wonder. "Pa, what's going to happen to it?" My jaw clenched. The sun bit at the back of my neck, and the dust stung my eyes. I knew what this town would do. I knew their answer. No child born of the condemned was allowed to draw breath in their righteous air. I could already hear the faint laughter drifting from the saloon. I could already picture the sheriff ordering the basket and everything in it to be thrown on a fire. I looked from the boy's terrified face to the infant struggling for every tiny breath, and I felt the weight of a choice settle on my back like a physical hand, pushing me forward. My boots scraped the dirt as I stood, leaving the empty basket behind. The baby was pressed close to my chest. The shadow of the gallows loomed over all three of us. The rope swung once more, slow and deliberate, as if giving me a final warning. But I set my jaw, and I muttered something low, just for the boy to hear. "It's breathing, son, and we're not leaving it here." The words had barely left my mouth when heavy boots slammed down on the platform boards right above our heads. A shadow fell over us, long and sharp in the afternoon sun. Sheriff Maddox stood at the edge of the gallows, his hat pulled low, his face a roadmap of cruel pride. He was the kind of man who'd ordered the rope pulled tight and hadn't even flinched. He squinted down, his eyes narrowing into slits as he took in the scene. Me, holding the bundle. The boy, hovering at my leg. "Put it back," Maddox growled. His voice was like iron scraping over rock. "That's the spawn of a murderer. It dies where she swung." The boy gasped and grabbed my sleeve, his small hand trembling like a trapped bird. But my arms just tightened around the bundle. I could feel the faint rise and fall of its chest against my own. A flicker of warmth in a cold world. "It's breathing," I said. My voice was flat, steady. It wasn't a plea. It was a fact. The sheriff stepped down from the gallows, his boots thudding on the hard-packed dirt. The townsfolk who'd started to wander off, they all turned back. They could smell the tension in the air, a different kind of spectacle. Another fight to feed on. Mothers pulled their children behind their skirts. Men folded their arms, their faces hard and expectant. Maddox planted himself right in front of me. His hand rested on the grip of his revolver, heavy and promising. His lip curled into a sneer. You think your hands can wash its bloodline clean? Its mother cursed this town with her sins. No man of mine will raise her get. Lay it down and walk away, drifter, before I hang you right beside it. The words were sharp, meant to cut deep. Laughter, nervous and cruel, rippled through the gathering crowd. But behind their eyes, something else was coiling. Unease. My jaw flexed. I kept my breathing slow, my gaze locked on the infant. Its tiny fingers were curling weakly against my shirt, searching for a hold. I felt the boy at my side, still trembling, but silent now. His eyes were on me, watching, waiting to see if a man could really stand for something. You had your rope, I said, my voice low but carrying in the sudden hush. But this one's breath isn't yours to steal. Murmurs erupted, spreading through the crowd like fire. Maddox's face darkened, the lines around his mouth tightening with fury. You'll defy my word? In my town, he barked. Then you'll see how long a drifter lasts without soil to be buried in. He raised his hand high, a sharp, angry signal. Two deputies shoved their way through the crowd. They had rifles in their arms, their eyes darting between the sheriff and the stranger, holding a life where death was supposed to reign. The boy at my side whispered again, his voice breaking. Pa, they're going to take it. And just then, the infant whimpered. It was a thin, reedy wail, small but piercing. It cut through the tension, a sound so alive it was an accusation. I shifted my stance, my boots grinding into the dust. My arms were a fortress around the child. My gaze met the deputies without flinching as they drew closer, their rifles glinting under the hateful sun. The sheriff's grin spread across his face, cold and triumphant. He barked the order. Take it, and if he resists, hang him. The crowd leaned in, a collective, hungry beast. The air in the square grew thick, choking with breath held too long, just waiting for the spark. Waiting for the violence that would finally shatter the silence. The deputies closed in. Their spurs jingled, the sound sharp and menacing in the quiet. The crowd parted for them, whispers hissing like snakes in the grass. I held my ground, the infant's weight a solid anchor against my chest. The boy's hand was still clamped on my sleeve, his knuckles white. Take it! Sheriff Maddox roared again. The first deputy lunged. His hand shot out, aiming to wrench the child from my arms. But I turned, fluid and fast. My shoulder caught him square in the chest, shoving him backward. He hit the dirt with a grunt that drew a wave of gasps from the onlookers. The bundle in my arms let out a sharp, startled cry. I adjusted my hold, my rough hands surprisingly gentle. Easy now, little one, I whispered. The second deputy swung his rifle up, the barrel glinting. But before he could get it level, my free hand snapped out like a whip. It slapped the rifle stock aside with an iron-hard crack. The gun clattered against a hitching post. The man cursed, stumbling back, and the crowd exploded. Some were cheering, some were jeering. All of them were hungry for the fight they had come crawling back to see. He's resisting the law! A man shouted. Another man spat in the dust. The law's gone mad, he growled. The sheriff's face went purple with rage. He stomped forward, his voice tearing through the din. That child's breath is cursed. Anyone who shields it shares its rope. The boy at my side cried out, No, Pa, don't let him! My jaw set like granite. My eyes narrowed to slits as I planted my boots deeper in the dust. I shifted the baby to the crook of one arm, my other hand balling into a fist that glinted with the silver scars of old battles. The first deputy scrambled to his feet, spitting a stream of blood and dust. His hand went to the butt of his pistol, but I saw the hesitation flicker in his eyes. He saw it in my stance, the cold certainty of a man who'd fought enough to know which battles were worth dying for. The crowd pressed in, the circle tightening. Some of the women hid their faces, but others leaned forward, their eyes wide and bright. My voice cut through the noise, steady and unbroken. You'll have to kill me to lay a hand on this child." Silence fell like a hammer. The words hung in the air, heavy as stones. Ripples of disbelief spread through the mob. Maddox just sneered. He drew his revolver in one smooth, practiced motion. The steel caught the noon sun, blinding for a second as he raised it to chest height. "So be it," he snarled, his finger tightening on the trigger. But before the hammer could fall, a cry tore from the back of the crowd. It was high and shrill, a woman's voice, slicing through the tension like a razor. "Stop! You can't!" Every head in the square turned. A woman was shoving her way forward, her bonnet torn, her face gaunt with a grief so deep it looked like it had been carved from bone. Her eyes were blazing with a wild fire. She stumbled into the center of the square, pointing a trembling hand at the bundle in my arms. "That's my daughter's child," she screamed, her voice shaking but fierce. "She begged me with her last breath to see it live." The square let out a single unified gasp. The weight of her words crashed down on them. Even the deputies froze, their rifles wavering. The sheriff's face twisted, a mask of shock and pure fury. That woman's cry cracked the sky open. Her words lashed every ear as she stumbled closer, her skirts dragging in the dirt. Her bonnet fell back, revealing a face hollowed out by grief but lit from within by a furious fire. "That's my daughter's child," she screamed again. She was pointing right at the bundle trembling against my chest. "She carried it in her belly when they took her, and with her last breath, she begged me to keep it safe." The murmurs exploded. The crowd recoiled, mothers clutching their children tight, men trading uneasy glances as a bitter shame began to prickle through their earlier jeers. Sheriff Maddox's jaw was a hard white line. His revolver was still aimed at my heart, but a single bead of sweat traced a path down his temple. "Lies," he spat, his voice raw with a sudden desperation. "Her kind cursed this town with sin, and the rope cleansed it. That babe is no blessing. It's a stain." The woman reeled back as if he'd struck her. Her eyes flashed with a terrible rage. "A stain? My daughter died with a prayer on her lips, and you call her blood a curse? Shame on you, Maddox. Shame on this whole town." Her words hit them harder than any stone. The murmurs turned sharper, cutting away at the sheriff's authority piece by piece. I held the infant tighter, feeling its fragile breast warm my skin. Though my face remained hard as a rock, something inside me shifted. The sight of that woman, clawing the truth into the air with her bare hands, had changed the shape of the day. "She speaks the truth," I said. My voice was low, but it was steady, and clear enough to hush the mob once more. "I've seen the gallows take guilty men, and I've seen it take those who never had a chance. This child didn't swing, and it won't." The boy at my side stared up at me, his eyes wide. His small voice trembled. "Pa, she said it's got a family." My hand tightened on the child, but my gaze never left Maddox. He sneered, his knuckles white on the grip of his revolver. "Family," he barked. "That bloodline's poison. Better it ends here than festers among us." His deputies shifted on their feet, uncertain. Their rifles were lowered halfway, their eyes darting between the sheriff's unbending rage and the crowd's growing unease. A rancher in the front spat into the dust. "It's a child, Maddox, not a curse." Another man muttered, "We watched her swing. None of us lifted a hand. Maybe the shame's ours, not hers." The sheriff's face blazed a dangerous red. Fury was choking him. "You'll all pay if you defy me," he shouted, thrusting the revolver higher, aiming it dead center on my chest. But before he could squeeze the trigger, the woman lunged forward. She grabbed the sheriff's sleeve with both hands, her voice shrill with grief and rage. "If you kill him, you kill me too, and God himself will mark your soul for it." The square roared, an animal torn between fear and its own rising fury. The deputies faltered, taking a step back into the press of bodies. Maddox snarled, ripping his arm free. He shoved the woman hard. She fell into the dust. Gasps tore through the air as she hit the ground, her bonnet scattering away from her head. My jaw set, my boots grinding in the dirt. But before I could move, the sheriff leveled the revolver again, his voice a roar of pure, cornered rage. "If no one else has the gall, I'll end this myself. Drifter, you and that cursed child die right here. The square held its breath. Maddox's finger tightened on the trigger. The revolver was steady on my chest. The infant squirmed weakly in my arms, as if it could feel the shadow of death hovering so close. A woman screamed. A man cursed. And then the gun cracked. Fire and smoke burst from the barrel, a flash of violence that split the noon air. Leora, the grieving mother, cried out from the dust where she'd fallen. She covered her head, bracing for the end. The boy at my side clutched my sleeve, his small voice breaking. "Pa!" The report of the gun echoed off the gallows, a ringing that vibrated in every chest. But I did not fall. I shifted my shoulder, feeling a sharp sting of heat. The bullet had torn through my coat, grazing flesh, but it had missed its mark. A wave of shock gas erupted from the crowd. They stumbled back, their murmurs a mix of awe and dread. Maddox snarled, fury twisting his face into an ugly mask. He couldn't believe it. The drifter was still standing, his arms steady, the child still alive in his hold. My jaw tightened. My voice came out like steel dragged across stone. "You missed your mark, Sheriff, and now the town's seen your law." My words cut sharper than his bullet. Whispers hissed through the crowd. Faces went pale. Others flushed with a sudden, hot shame. "He aimed at a babe," someone muttered, horrified. "The sheriff's lost his soul," another spat. Maddox roared, swinging the revolver up again. But this time, his deputies didn't back him. They shifted, their rifles lowering, their eyes filled with a new and dangerous doubt. My stance didn't waver. My body was square to him, my boots rooted in the dust as if the earth itself was holding me steady. The infant whimpered again. It was a thin cry, rising above the murmurs, fragile but unbroken. And that sound silenced the crowd more effectively than any gun. I glanced down at the child, then back at the sheriff. My voice was steady, low, but it carried to every ear in that square. "It's breathing, Sheriff, and I won't walk away." The words rolled out, heavy and simple. Simple as truth, undeniable as the sunrise. The square seemed to quake with the weight of it. Some people were nodding. Some were weeping. All of them were caught in the grip of a vow that no rope could ever bind. Maddox's face turned a deep, blotchy purple, veins bulging in his temples. With a roar of pure desperation, he fired again. The bullet kicked up dust, inches from my boots, and the crowd erupted. They were no longer silent. They were furious. Voices clashed, men shouting, women screaming. The tide had finally broken free. "Enough!" a rancher bellowed. He surged forward, shoving his way through the circle. "You'll murder a babe in daylight?" Others followed, their shouts becoming a storm. The square was boiling over. The sheriff spun around, his revolver jerking wildly, his grip on the town, on himself, slipping under the crushing weight of their hate. My eyes stayed steady. The child was pressed safe against my chest. And though the crowd surged like a wave, I did not move. My calm was a mirror that made the sheriff's rage look small and weak and broken. And in that charged, breathless moment, just before the mob collided with their lawmen, the boy at my side whispered the words that cut through the roar. "Pa, it's still breathing." The square exploded into pure chaos. Voices collided like thunder as men surged forward. Women screamed, dragging their children back. The orderly circle of spectators collapsed into a raging storm. Sheriff Maddox spun wildly, his revolver waving, his voice completely drowned in the roar of fury he had finally unleashed. "Murderer!" someone bellowed. "He'd kill a babe!" cried another. Stones started to fly. They clattered against the wooden boards of the gallows, kicking up angry clouds of dust. I tightened my arms around the infant, its thin wail sharp and clear in the tumult. With my free hand, I pulled the boy close, shielding them both with the broad wall of my body. The deputies faltered. Their rifles were only halfway raised, their eyes flicking nervously at the sea of faces. This was no longer a crowd that stood behind a badge. This was a mob, pressing forward with pure, unadulterated hate. Maddox fired another shot. The bullet cracked into a post, sending splinters flying. Women shrieked as the sound tore through their ears. The mob lurched back for a single heartbeat, then surged forward again, even braver now, their fury fueling their boots. I shifted my weight, stepping up onto the edge of the gallows platform. I used the height to keep the worst of the crush at bay. My jaw was set, my gaze fixed on the sheriff, who was flailing in the dust below like a drowning man. "You lost your law the second you aimed at this child," I thundered, my voice carrying over the storm. The crowd roared its answer. Fists shook in the air. Curses spat from their lips. Maddox's face was a blaze of red, veins bulging at his temples. He shrieked, "Silence! You'll obey or you'll hang beside them." But his words were hollow, brittle. They shattered against the rising tide. A big rancher shoved his way to the front. His hand shot out and snatched the barrel of the revolver, wrenching it aside. The gun fired wild, a useless shot into the empty blue sky. Smoke curled up as birds scattered from the rooftops. Gas tore through the mob. Then came louder cries. Suddenly, hands were grabbing at the sheriff's coat, dragging him, spinning him, shoving him toward the very gallows he had ruled from. "Hang him with his own rope," someone howled. The chant caught like a disease, savage and hot, until the whole square was shaking with it. Maddox fought back, kicking and snarling. His badge glinted in the dust as it was torn from his chest. It was flung into the dirt, trampled instantly beneath a dozen angry boots. The boy at my side pressed his face into my arm, trembling. "Pa," he whispered, "they're going to kill him." But my eyes never left the child in my arms. Its tiny chest was fluttering, its breath shallow but miraculously steady. "Not while I stand," I muttered. But whether it was a promise or a prayer, even I couldn't say. The mob heaved, dragging Maddox hard against the gallows post. The rope dangled just above his head. His screams were thin and useless against their fury. The whole square seemed to tremble on the very edge of spilling blood. I shifted, stepping down from the platform, back into the dust. My voice cut through the noise, low but fierce. "You hang him and this child breathes in blood instead of hope. Decide what you want this town to be." My words struck home. They froze some, their hands faltering. They shamed others, their eyes flicking away with doubt. For a single tense breath, the rope hung still. The sheriff thrashed while the mob quivered, torn between their desire for vengeance and the hard truth I had just laid at their feet. And then, like the crack of a whip, Maddox lunged. He ripped himself free from their grip, shoving his way through the press of bodies. His eyes were wild. A knife flashed in his fist as he spun toward me and the babe. He was a cornered beast, desperate and deadly, and the gleaming steel was just inches from a life that had only just begun. The knife gleamed like fire in Sheriff Maddox's fist as he lunged. The crowd scattered with screams, boots grinding in panic. The mob that had been hunting him just a moment before now recoiled in terror from the raw violence of his last stand. I turned, my arms a vice around the infant, its frail cry cutting the air. With my free hand, I shoved the boy behind me, my own body becoming a wall of flesh and bone, a shield between the blade and the fragile breasts I carried. Maddox's roar tore through the square, his face twisted with hate, spittle flying from his lips. His badge was gone, but his rage burned hotter than the sun. The steel slashed close, so close it grazed the fabric of my sleeve. Sparks flew as the tip of the knife struck the gallows post. I pivoted, my boot grinding deep into the dust. My voice was a growl, torn from somewhere old and raw. "You've spilled enough," I barked. I ducked his next wild swing, keeping the bundle pressed tight against my chest. The sheriff snarled, his eyes insane with madness. Each strike was more reckless than the last, more desperate. The knife carved deadly arcs in the air that drove the townsfolk back against the storefront walls. Women clutched their children. Men cursed, but no one moved to help. Their righteous fury had been swallowed whole by a primal fear. Their bloodlust had curdled into terror. I felt the baby stir weakly in my arms. Its fragile weight was a stark reminder that a single moment of hesitation meant death. With a sudden lunge, I moved inside his swing. I caught Maddox's wrist, our bodies colliding with a grunt. The knife shuddered, its point just inches from my throat. Gasps ripped through the mob. The struggle pulled both of us down into the dirt. I rolled, twisting my body to shield the child, my forearms straining against the sheriff's surprising strength. The boy screamed, "Pa!" His small fist beat uselessly at the dust. The crowd surged closer, a ring of horrified faces, but they dared not step in. Maddox's breath came in ragged, hot bursts. His eyes were bulging as he pressed the blade down. Harder, harder. A drop of his sweat dripped from his brow onto my cheek. My teeth clenched, my muscles trembling with the strain. The knife edge bit so close I could smell the sharp metallic tang of my own blood welling up. With a roar, I twisted, rolling us both over. I planted my boot hard against the sheriff's gut and shoved him back. The knife clattered once on the hard ground, but Maddox snatched it up again. He scrambled backward, foam at his lips. "That child die!" he shrieked, lifting the blade high for a final, desperate strike. But in that exact moment, the infant let out a piercing wail. It was louder than it had been yet, a cry that was strong and fierce, and it echoed in the space beneath the gallows. The sound cut through the mob, silencing them. It even froze Maddox mid-motion, the knife trembling in his raised grip. Every eye in that square locked on the baby's chest, rising and falling. Steady, undeniable. Its cry was raw, but it was powerfully, defiantly alive. My voice came out low and fierce, carrying through the sudden hush. "You hear it, Sheriff? That's breath, and it ain't yours to take." Maddox roared again, a sound of pure animal rage, and slashed down. The crowd screamed as they saw the steel fall, aimed directly at the child's fragile frame. The knife came down in a blur of deadly steel. The crowd shrieked, mothers shielding their children's eyes from the horror. But I twisted, my shoulder slamming up into Maddox's arm. The blow knocked his strike wide. The blade buried itself deep in the dirt with a dull, sickening thud. Dust exploded around the hilt. The sheriff snarled, ripping the knife free for another swing. But I surged forward, one arm still cradling the infant, my other hand clamping down hard around Maddox's wrist. The sheriff spat curses, his teeth bared, sweat pouring down his face. Veins bulged in his neck as he strained to bring the blade back down, to finish it. But my grip held, strong as iron. The baby wailed, its cry high and fierce, cutting through the sounds of our struggle. And for the first time, the mob saw something other than fragility in that sound. They heard strength, a voice that was louder and truer than any of the sheriff's threats. "It's breathing!" someone shouted. It was a woman's voice, trembling but sharp. The words rippled through the crowd like a spark hitting dry grass. "It breathes!" another voice echoed. The murmurs turned to shouts. The chant caught, swelling into a tide of sound that crashed against the sheriff's roar. Maddox fought harder, desperate now. His knife jerked wildly, inches from my cheek. But his eyes flickered at the sound of the crowd. Fear was twisting with his rage as their cries grew louder. "It breathes! It lives!" I heaved, wrenching the sheriff's arm until I felt bone crack. The knife tumbled free at last, clattering across the dust until a rancher's boot slammed down on it, pinning it to the ground. Maddox screamed, clutching his broken wrist. But the sound was completely drowned beneath the rising chorus of the town. The crowd pressed closer, no longer afraid, no longer silent. They saw the truth laid bare in the baby's cry, in the drifter's arms shielding it. It was life against death, defiance against cruelty, and they surged with it, their fists shaking, their voices raw. Maddox staggered back, his face pale, his authority shattered into a million pieces. But still, he shrieked, "It's cursed! You're all cursed if it lives!" His voice cracked, hollow against the roar that rose like thunder, drowning him out. I stood tall, the infant pressed close, my chest heaving, dust clinging to my sweat. My eyes were fixed, steady, on the lawman who had finally lost his grip on this town. I lifted the bundle high enough for all of them to see. I showed them the child's tiny chest, rising and falling. Proof. Undeniable. "This is no curse," I shouted, my voice carrying over the mob, steady as bedrock. "This is breath, and you can't hang breath." The crowd erupted. Voices were breaking, some weeping, some laughing. The chant, "It lives," rolled through the square like a cleansing storm. Maddox's eyes darted around, wild and cornered. His back hit the gallows post, trapped by the very symbol of his power. His hand clawed at his hip for a pistol that was no longer there. The mob pressed closer, their collective fury shaking the wooden boards. Their wrath was a tide that no badge could ever stem. Maddox's mouth foamed with rage, but his words died in the roar. His body trembled as the reality crashed down on him. His power was gone. My boots shifted, my stance firm, but my gaze stayed locked on the sheriff. My jaw clenched. I waited. I waited for the moment the town itself decided whether to break its tyrant or to bury him. The mob surged as one. Hands seized Maddox's coat, dragging him hard against the very post he had ruled from. His screams were high and ragged as the gallows creaked above him. "String him up!" a man bellowed. The chant caught fast, savage and hot. Fists were shaking, boots were pounding the dirt. The rope was swinging overhead as if it had been waiting for him all along. Maddox kicked, clawed, spittle flying as he shouted, "I am the law!" But the words rang hollow, drowned beneath the roar of voices that no longer feared him. I stood rooted in the dust, the infant pressed close to my chest. Its small breath was steady now, its cries spent and settled into a quiet rhythm. The boy clung to my sleeve, his eyes wide, trembling at the fury that boiled around us. A rancher grabbed the noose and flung it down. The coarse rope slapped against the sheriff's chest. Hands shoved it up toward his throat. Maddox thrashed, his face turning purple, his eyes rolling wild as he shrieked curses at them. The mob only howled louder, their vengeance a wild, unchained thing. My jaw tightened, sweat running down my temple. I knew that look in their eyes. I'd seen that same blind rage on battlefields and in dusty backwater trails. It was a rage that cared little for who it swallowed. "Pa," the boy whispered, tugging hard on my sleeve. "They'll kill him." I felt the child in my arms stir, the fragile life I had sworn to protect pressed against my own heartbeat. I took a step forward. My voice was low, but it carried, steady as stone. "You hang him now, and you hang yourselves right beside him." The words cut through the rage of some. Their hands faltered, their eyes flicking with doubt. But others just shouted back, "He aimed at a babe! He deserves the rope!" The mob strained, pulling Maddox closer to the beam. His heels dug trenches in the dust. His badge was gone, his authority was gone, but his fury was unbroken. His voice was raw as he spat, "You'll all rot for this!" The rope slipped higher, brushing against his neck. Gasps tore the air as the crowd leaned in close, breathless, standing on the brink of blood. I raised the infant high again, its chest rising, falling. "Undeniable," my voice thundered over them. "This breath is the proof you need. Do you want it to start its life in blood, the same way its mother ended hers?" The hush that followed was a quivering, terrible thing. The town was torn between its rage and its shame, but the mob still held Maddox fast, their fists trembling, their fury straining against the weight of my truth. The sheriff's eyes burned, his hate thick as poison, and with a sudden, violent wrench, he ripped himself free from their grip. He didn't lunge for escape. He lunged for vengeance. His hand flashed to a hidden blade strapped to his boot. Steel hissed as he swung. His snarl was the last roar of a dying beast. He hurled himself toward me and the child, his face twisted, his aim true. The knife drove straight for the fragile bundle of life cradled in my arms. The knife streaked through the air, steel flashing, cruel in the sun, as Sheriff Maddox lunged for his final, damning act. But I twisted. My boot ground deep into the dust as my free arm snapped up, catching the lawman's wrist in mid-swing. The crowd gasped, the sound as sharp as a thunderclap. The boy cried out, "Pa!" as the infant wailed, its tiny cry piercing through the chaos. Maddox snarled, spittle flying from his lips. His muscles strained as he tried to drive the blade down into the bundle, pressed against my chest. But my grip was iron. My jaw was clenched, my eyes burning with a calm, cold fury that would not yield. For a single, eternal heartbeat, the two of us were locked in a struggle of wills. Every ounce of strength we had trembled in our arms, the knife quivering just inches from the child's fragile breath. Then with a roar, I wrenched his arm sideways. I twisted the sheriff's wrist until the bone snapped with a sickening crack. The knife clattered free, spinning across the dust where a rancher's boot pinned it fast. Maddox screamed. He fell to his knees, clutching his ruined hand, his chest heaving with rage and fear as the mob surged closer around him. I stood tall, the child safe in my arms. Its cries were loud and certain now, its tiny chest rising strong, as if it were defying the very rope that had hung above it. I lifted the bundle high, my voice thundering over the stunned silence. It breathes, and no rope, no curse, no man can take that from it. The square fell completely silent. Every face turned to the sight of the drifter, scarred by dust and blood, holding the infant alive in his arms. The truth was too plain to deny. Some wept openly. Others bowed their heads, the heavy weight of their shame settling on their shoulders. A few men slowly uncurled their fists, their rage finally spent, replaced by a quiet awe. Sheriff Maddox staggered to his feet, his eyes wild, his power gone forever. His voice broke as he spat. "It's cursed! You're all cursed!" But no one listened. His own deputies turned their backs on him. The crowd parted, cold as stone, letting him pass. With nothing left but his own broken fury, he stumbled away, his figure shrinking as he disappeared into the alleys like a shadow already fading into nothing. My chest heaved. The weight of the infant was heavy but steady in my arms. I looked down and saw its tiny lips part, a breath stronger than any before rising from its small chest. The boy at my side whispered, his voice filled with a quiet wonder. "Pa, it's really alive." I bent my head, pressing my rough cheek against the child's soft head. My voice was low but firm, carrying just enough for those nearest to hear. "It's alive, son, and we won't walk away." I turned and started walking away from the gallows, the boy close at my side. The rope swayed, useless above us. The mob stood silent behind us, their shame a ghost that would haunt that square forever. Step by step, I carried the child into the light, past the dust, past the rope, past the stain of cruelty that had tried to end a life it couldn't understand. And as the sun poured gold over us, the cry of the infant faded into soft, steady breaths, a sound stronger than any gunshot, any rope, any curse. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe to Echoes of the West for more tales of justice and redemption. Let me ask you this. If you had heard that faint cry from under the gallows, would you have walked away or would you have carried it into the light? Let me know in the comments below.